One Piece Chapter 1091 features a fun color spread of these Straw Hats enjoying some pizza. I'm not seeing many potential Easter eggs this time around, but let me know if you guys spot anything. I guess we do have two flamingos here, so maybe something Dofi related, but we already know that he has his own seraphim named S Flamingo. To kick things off, now that Admiral Kizaru had begun his infiltration of Egghead Island, the remainder of the fleet prepared themselves for battle. They knew that the island's pacifista forces would not take this attempt lightly, and they were right. The pacifistas immediately prepared to strike. To avoid disaster, the Marines needed to stop the robots from firing their lasers. So, they unloaded several cannonballs at them. But almost immediately afterwards, many of the ships began to quake and rumble. But this wasn't from Blackbeard or anything. Although we can't forget that his ship is still near Egghead Island. The weaponized sea beasts were now upon the Marines and causing major destruction. How convenient would it be if one of these things were able to sink the ship that has St. J. Garcia inside of it? The bald and many-necked Vice Admiral, whose name we still don't know, wanted all the smoke. He unleashed a steam-powered fist on a hippo sea beast, and it looks like he has a mechanized arm of some sort. Vice Admiral Dahl joined in on the fighting at the same time, rushing towards the pacifista for the sake of protecting the ships. Delivering a solid kick to the face, she was prepared to give them the fight they seemed to want. And with that, the various Vice Admirals of the fleet made their way onto the island and engaged all the pacifistas. Up in the Labostratum, Usopp was watching the entire scene unfold thanks to Denden Mushi's surveillance. He was shocked by how intense it all was. Vegapunk Stella did not expect all of this to unfold so soon. With Sentomaru anticipating their assault with a squad of 50 pacifistas, it should have been all too clear that the island's defenses were nearly impossible to crack. And here, we are also reminded of the hierarchy of pacifista control. At the very bottom is anyone with an authority chip. So high-ranking Marine officials and such, or at least ideally. In theory, you could steal one of these chips and control a massive robot army like a supervillain, and only a handful of characters would be able to stop you. Speaking of which, Sentomaru is above any chip holders. All the Vegapunks are above him, and then at the very top, we have the 5 elders. Right now, nobody really knows that one of the elders is nearby, but because he is, I think it's pretty safe to assume that he will gain control in some capacity at a later point. And remember, this hierarchy applies to the Seraphim too. Usopp quickly realized that the Marines had sent Kizaru to deal with Sentomaru. Nami couldn't believe it. Stussy was right. The Marines sent an admiral to deal with them. Brook couldn't help but remember how Kizaru thrashed their crew on Sabaody. The Admiral was already fighting against Sentomaru. Knowing that, Dr. Vegapunk felt horrible. Asking Sentomaru to fight Kizaru of all people was far too cruel. He would totally understand if his bodyguard decided to run away. But as a light enhanced kick hurtled towards him, Sentomaru hardened his defenses and stood firm. The Admiral launched his former protege a great distance away. He urged his friend turned opponent to simply surrender. But before any response could be given, he shot a flurry of light beams in his target's direction. Seeing this, Sentomaru ran as fast as he could. He apologized to his father figure. He could not back down since he made a promise to Luffy. The big man saw and grabbed hold of his battle axe. Then, he rushed up in his uncle's direction. Kizaru wondered when Sentomaru became so friendly towards pirates. Sentomaru owed his life to Vegapunk. It didn't matter who he needed to team up with if it meant saving the old man's life. He swung his axe, but Kizaru split himself in half before any contact was made. But Sentomaru was not done and followed up with another swing. Thinking back, Kizaru remembered how a little Sentomaru had beaten him and Dr. Vegapunk to the punch. They were tasked with handling the recent bear attacks in the area, but Sentomaru had already taken care of things. This really must have been one hell of a bear problem to have needed Kizaru and a bunch of Marines. Sentomaru claimed that the villagers were weaklings and he hated them for it. He really didn't want to go back. Kizaru thought that was funny since he was pretty sure that the villagers kicked the kid out. Little Sentomaru insisted that all he needs is a good paying job. He was sure of his own strength, which allowed him to avoid getting hungry. With that in mind, Dr. Vegapunk wondered what the child planned on doing with the money then. Sentomaru immediately began drooling at the thought alone and shouted that he wanted onigiri. Kizaru thought that was pretty funny too. This fond memory was enough to make the Admiral genuinely smile in the midst of their battle. He remembered how adorable the kid was back then. We're shown the moment when Dr. Vegapunk offered to make Sentomaru his bodyguard, a prospect that totally excited the kid. Then, there was a time when Sentomaru decided to call Vegapunk Grandpa and Kizaru Uncle. He also wanted the Admiral to train him. Kizaru wasn't opposed to the teaching aspect, but didn't like being called Uncle since he was still rather young. In the present, he told Sentomaru that he had taught the kid as best as he could. Sentomaru landed a heavy blow onto the Admiral, but Kizaru did not budge. He just let Sentomaru know that his own defenses are pretty impressive too. With one last hit, Kizaru sent Sentomaru crashing into the ground. The sound could even be heard from the outside. Kizaru lifted his authority chip and made an announcement to all nearby pacifista. He told them that the previous command giver was knocked out and no longer able to exercise their authority. Now that he was in charge, he wanted them to shift gears and protect the naval fleet instead. Firstly, by destroying the weaponized sea beasts that were terrorizing their ships. Just like that, the pacifista squad went to work, and the information was relayed to St. J. Garcia Saturn. He wasn't happy about destroying such useful weapons and saw it as a waste. But if it was between the weaponized sea beasts and 50 pacifistas, the better choice was clearly the Kuma clones. He planned on keeping track of all their losses here and desired regular updates. As the dust cleared, Usopp was stunned to see that Sentomaru had been defeated. Dr. Vegapunk immediately began to cry uncontrollably. They couldn't afford to waste any time. He and his fellow Vegapunks moved as quickly as they could to take back control of their systems and make good use of Sentomaru's sacrifice. But Vegapunk York insisted that they wouldn't be able to crack her code. After all, she is a Vegapunk too. With Sentomaru's body on the ground near him, Kizaru looked up towards his next objective. Vegapunk Stella told them all to focus up. Because Kizaru is made of light, he could be passing through the barrier at any moment. Usopp hadn't even thought of that possibility and was suddenly really scared. Again, the memory of how badly the Admiral beat them back in the day came to mind. Kizaru thought of this himself and felt a bit nostalgic. And just like that, he left Sentomaru and made his way up. The Straw Hats knew that they needed to get out of Dodge as soon as possible. Lilith was having the Vega Force 1 carry the Sunny to the back of the island. Just then, an alarm started blaring. Luffy and Bonnie were in the midst of eating again, but Luffy had anticipated this moment ahead of time. Lilith confirmed that this sound was their emergency siren, which was strange since no one should be able to make it past the barrier. Once he made it above, Kizaru spoke of the power station, Punk Records, and Vegapunk York. Those were the three things that could not be harmed in this siege. He wished he could add old friends to the list, but sadly, Dr. Vegapunk's death was their #1 priority here. Kizaru has officially infiltrated the dome. With Luffy and the others still on their way back, Usopp shouted that their captain needed to hurry up. Brook was concerned too. Stella reminded them that it would be pointless to lift the barrier if the ship isn't ready for their departure. Just then, Stussy noticed something. Hattori flew into the air. Rob Lucci rushed towards the unsuspecting Dr. Vegapunk. Stussy took a Shigan to save the doctor's life. A grim expression washed over Vegapunk's face. Stussy was down. Sanji quickly grabbed hold of Nami's bubble gun. He shot Kaku with it. The agent was already injured and as a Devil Fruit user, would be weakened by the bubble container. To Sanji, it looked like Lucci had decided not to tell Kaku about his plan. And after Stussy's betrayal, it's hard to blame him. Zoro's blades collided with Lucci's hardened leg. Zoro was annoyed to see that Lucci needed backup to grow a backbone, but Lucci did not care. He was convinced that with him and Kizaru working together, their enemies were all as good as dead. As they crashed through a nearby wall, Zoro told the agent that he should know by now how foolish it is to underestimate them. And oh lord, Zoro is the last person that needs to go off on his own at a time like this. I really hope Usopp keeps an eye on him with that surveillance system. Elsewhere, Kizaru was watching the Vega Force 1 make its way across the field. Earlier, he wondered where the Straw Hat ship was since he didn't see it on the shore. Now he had his answer. Frankie called out to Luffy to let him know that the Marines sent an Admiral after them. He wondered what they should do about it. But by then, Luffy was already gone. That's when Kizaru saw the Emperor. The two exchanged a brief greeting. Then in the next instant, Luffy's Haki-enhanced kick slammed into Kizaru, who was barely able to get his guard up in time. He could see that Luffy was as cheeky as ever. With an intense smile on his face, Luffy let Kizaru know that they were all 100 times stronger than they were 2 years ago on Sabaody. It is finally time for an Emperor versus Admiral fight. It is finally time for Luffy to thrash an Admiral. Kizaru has no idea what Gear 5 is and is about to have his mind blown. We're gonna give you guys another video on this crazy matchup because there is just way too much to be said.